Hi folks, and welcome back for part 2 of my series on how I built my new match fishing seat box. Last time we built the base frame and the footplate, and this time we're going to build the top box and the drawers, and we're going to put it all together and finalise the basic items. I think I did mention last time that I will probably produce a quick video or two on how to build the accessories, but I also probably mentioned that you can buy anything you like from the tackle shops and they will fit onto these 25mm legs. I should point out that I have no formal training whatsoever in either woodwork or metalwork, so everything that I've designed here has come about through me designing and building my own fishing tackle boxes in the workshop over the last 25 or 30 years. So here's our base frame then, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to be building that new top box to fit to the edges of these two side rails, to the back of the rear cross member, and at the front, and this was something I didn't have any control over, you can probably see this is radiused or curved. Now I would have preferred to have just a straightforward 90-degree angle, but I couldn't buy that, so I've had to go for the radius. So as I say, the box itself will fit to the sides and on the back. At the front, however, it's going to be a little bit short of that radius, so it's going to be a couple of millimetres shorter from front to rear than the actual frame is. Materials wise, I'm going to use this 9mm marine grade plywood, sometimes also known as AA grade plywood, because obviously that is waterproof and the glue won't come apart if it does get wet. That shouldn't be a problem anyway because we're going to coat this in paint, so it should never get wet, but you never know. So I'm going to go with the slightly higher quality marine grade plywood. I've already cut the back and the two sides, which will go on like this. The two sides fit on and butt up like that, rather than the back plate going behind them, because I find that easier to keep everything square. What I've also done is at 50mm down, or in this case I think 55mm down, I've just cut a groove out which is 4mm deep, and that's going to take the wooden trays. So that'll be going in like that. And the same applies all the way around the back and the other side there. For the front, this one, I've cut a similar groove at the same height as this, and that will sit on the front like that. Now all this will be pinned and glued together just to keep it held together while I do other things. Structurally, even that wouldn't be all that great, so we will be doing something shortly to show you how to increase the structural integrity of the whole piece. At the bottom, I have actually cut a similar groove or rebate in the bottom all the way around, and so of course the base will fit in that way. Put this back on the top. As I say, this is only there to hold the pieces in place while we construct the main carcass. We're going to use these 1/2 inch or 12mm square tube aluminium pieces as uprights and supports. Take the different square tube aluminium sections, put them in like that, and then as you can see we're now able to screw into those. What I have done, as you can see, is I've given myself a little bit of space around the edges of each of the uprights here, because I've found in the past that by the time I've got paint on there, sometimes that can make that a really tight fit, and it has no effect on the structural integrity by just making that a little bit wider. With that done, I can now glue up all of the edges here. Don't do the base at this point, guys, and the reason for that will become clear shortly. Now just push in and make sure we're properly located. Okay, bit more cleanup and then we'll leave it to dry for a while. So that's everything glued together, and I've put it back against the back plate here. I've also just slid in this base plate at the bottom. The idea being that if you push everything together like that and against the base plate, that'll keep everything nice and perpendicular to each other. I've given it a few minutes and I'm just going to fit this frontal plate because it's just convenient. Just make sure that everything's nice and square. A couple of brads in each one. And I am just going to put a couple of brads in on the bottom just to make sure this doesn't sag or in any way come apart. I'm just going to take this opportunity to glue in these support members. That way they can dry overnight and be properly dry for in the morning. Now I've just measured up the centre points of the front and back rails. As you can see, I've marked it on here. And obviously putting this one in is going to be fairly straightforward. I can just drop that in, glue it, it'll be fine. But I've cut this one so that it's exactly the distance from the back of the unit, and it lines up absolutely squarely here with these support members. So what will happen is that will sit back 9mm inside there, and then the fronts of the drawers will actually sit flush with the front of this plate here and this area here. I've marked a centre line. The top support's actually a lot easier to fit because it's just going to be within the lines that I've marked on here. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Now obviously we can't get brad nails in from the bottom because we've got the lower structural support member in, but I am just going to put a quick brad into the top here. Just to hold it in place. Same at the back. So I suppose now it's just a question of waiting until tomorrow and then we can continue. Morning. It's actually about 4 or 5 days later rather than the next morning. Life got in the way and so haven't really had time to do a great deal on the project for the last few days. However, what I have done is get some of the inserts in the top tray. This is what I've done. Obviously this is the front end of the box and I've put various dividers in there now to sort out my tackle. These are the less bulky items, and what that did was give me the ability to add a tray. Now obviously these dividers, they're just bits of 6mm plywood and I've stuck them in to accommodate these floats and so on. The last thing I should do is just mention construction of this. This is very similar to what I'm going to do for the drawers. It's 9mm plywood with 3mm plywood base, and I've just butt jointed them. So the last thing we need to do before we go to paint is to glue in these blocks. But before I glue them, I've got to drill holes in them, and they're going to be at 15mm centres from the edge here. And the reason for that, if I show you this one on this side, this is the tray which would normally sit inside, and this is obviously from my last box. This also has a hole in it in this corner with a block. So what will happen is that we'll be taking one of these brass pins, it'll go down through there and end up going through here and locking the drawers in position. So that's the two holes drilled in the blocks. The blocks are in position, and what I've done now is just drilled down through and through this layer here too. Now when you come to put your pin in, don't forget to allow yourself a little bit of room down here. That's about 8mm, so that it takes account of when the pin goes down, it's actually not going to foul the lid. I've taken some white paper tape and I've put it along these edges of the top box unit. The idea is that when I come to do the painting, all of these won't get any paint, because eventually, of course, we're going to need to glue on the base unit here. And I've done a similar thing with the base unit. Anything which is going to require gluing has now got a little bit of tape on it. What it means is I can paint all around this and I can be sure that I'm not going to go over the edges, and of course I don't want to be trying to glue where there's paint. I want to be trying to glue where we've got bare wood. And the reason we haven't got the base unit on, I can't put it back on now, but assume that the lower base was on. If you tried to paint in here, trying to get your hand in and trying to get a paintbrush, it's almost impossible to manoeuvre. The only other thing I've done is I've taken a bit of time to just fill in these imperfections here, and I'm ready now to start painting. So here we are then. That's the top box. Had 2 coats of paint. I've done it over a couple of days. I just took my time and allowed the paint to dry properly. For the inside of here, I just used a paintbrush. But what you'll find is that you do get brush strokes when you do that. It's fine for the inside, but on the outside you want a good finish. And so for that one, I just use one of these rollers. This isn't one of those hairy rollers, this is a sponge roller, which is designed to give you a nice glossy or satin finish, as in this case. The next thing I have to do is to fit some structural supports. I'm going to use this tube aluminium, and it's going to go in like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw from the outsides of here into it. Now at the moment, if you remember, this was only butt jointed with a bit of glue, which isn't the best for structural support. By the time I've screwed all this in, it's really going to be a very strong item. And of course, I weigh over 200 pounds, so I want to make sure this thing is as strong as I can possibly get it. I've refitted the base just loosely, and I've inserted one of these support members. When you put this in, make sure you haven't got drips of glue down on the inside there to push it out away from the main frame. So what I'm going to do now is just drill a hole for these screws. These are 8G 16mm screws with a Phillips head, and I'm going to put one in. Now remember that this section here is about 55mm down. I'm going to put one in somewhere around about 45mm, and then 2 more at 1/3 and 2/3 down here, and the same on this side. That's going to give me a lot of structural support. But then once we've finished, I'm going to be adding this member on. This is actually mostly decorative, but I'll also be putting in screws into this one to both hold this in place and to provide additional support as required for this square member here. There we go. Just enough so it's just sunk behind the fascia there. I fitted the 2 supports here, and all I've done for that is just 2 screws in the side. I will come back later, fill this in, and it will be getting another couple of coats of paint. But for the moment, that's as much as we can do on that part. On the rails, I'm going to need to fit that onto here, as I showed you before. My top drawer is going to be 40mm deep. It's going to have a 3mm base, so that's 43mm, and I'm going to have a clearance, a gap, of 2mm, so 45mm. So I've cut this piece of scrap wood at 45mm, and I'm just going to insert it along the rail there. Let's just get that in properly, like that, so that the rail comes no further forward than the front edge of this support here. And by holding it in like that, I'm going to drill a hole in the front of here, and then I'm going to use a rivet to hold it in place. Do the same down here, and then this whole thing will be nice and parallel to this base here. And this is where you need one of these. This is a right-angled drill attachment, actually very handy, not just for this project, but whenever you want to get into a confined space, you can use these things. They're really good. I've used them quite a few times in the past. And what you can do now is put this in, and you can drill within the confines of this space. A little bit fiddly, but it works really well, as I say. And if you're doing the other side, you can just take off this handle, which has got a long thread on it, and put it in the other side. Or just leave it off altogether and just hold it like that to do it. They're not expensive, actually. You can get some expensive ones, but That one, I've seen them on Amazon for about £10 in sterling, which is maybe $20 Australian and probably 18-ish dollars in America. So that's what we're going to use, and I'm going to get on with that now. It's a good tight fit, and that's the first one in and ready to go. The lower tray is going to be about 30mm, plus 3mm for the base and a couple of millimetres for clearance. So I've cut myself a piece of scrap wood in exactly the same way as I did before, and obviously at that point the rails need to come no further down than these support pieces here, otherwise when we put the base on it's going to impede it. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I did before. For these middle ones it's pretty much the same idea. I'm using the scrap wood to keep it in place. I've drilled my 2 holes in the ends, but this time obviously we're going to be riveting into wood. And yes, I know that you shouldn't rivet into wood, but this isn't going to take a great deal of weight, and I've tried screws in the past, and if you use countersunk you can't get them countersunk enough without them going straight through the metal, and if you use those with a pan head or any other kind of head, they stick out too much. So I'm just going to put a little dab of glue on the back of here, and then I'm just going to rivet them in. I've tried it before and it seems to work pretty well. Okay, so that's all the rails done. Last thing I've got to do for today is to take the base and just glue this in so that we can allow that to dry overnight. Okay, so the glue's all dry then, and I've taken the opportunity just to fill in the holes where the screws were, and I've also taken the opportunity to put a coat of paint over the top. Same at the bottom, bit of muck on the bottom of this one at the moment, but just to make sure everything's covered. It will get a final coat before we finish off, and I may even put that varnish coat on, as I said sometime previously. So now what we've got to do is we've got to build the drawers. Now I've taken the opportunity to cut all the wood for the drawers, and I've actually made one up to show you. What I'm using is 3mm plywood for the base. Couldn't get my hands on marine grade, so I'm going to have to make sure that these are properly sealed up. As you can see, this is the top drawer, and it just slides in. Make it quite a loose fit, so it goes all the way in. And as you can see, it actually comes to not quite the forward edge of this line here. And the reason for that is we're going to be putting a faceplate on it, and that faceplate will effectively go on and fit flush with everything there. Now if I can get this out, bear with me. Oh sorry, the reason you make this a sliding fit, by the way, is because it is wood, and even though it's sealed, it does seem to have a propensity to swell slightly in the damp weather. So a good sloppy fit is what works for me. As you can see, good wobble on it. Goes in and out quite happily. Now I have actually, on each of these rails, I just rounded over this back corner because, as I showed you before, we're using these rivets inside here to hold the rails on. And so by having that bevel on the back, when I put this in, it doesn't catch. Very simple, but it's actually quite important to do that. So for the 2 rails then, I've cut it so that if you just bring it to the back of that front support, you can probably see that this is about a 2 or 3mm gap. So that's how much shorter it is. I've also rounded off the back edge, as I mentioned, but what I didn't mention previously was I've created this rebate, and that's going to take this front plate. Now I could probably have just literally glued that and pinned it in, but I'm going to be pulling against this because this is going to be the front of the drawer. So I've decided I want more gluing area, so I've created just a little cutout or a rebate in there to do that. At the back isn't going to take any real force on anything actually, so literally that can just be a 9mm piece of plywood straight across, no rebates required. Oh, I should have mentioned I'm using 9mm plywood for the sides, but just not the front. Remember, the front edge with the rebate is going to be at the very front edge of the base. We're going to have a little bit sticking out at the back, But we'll come back to that shortly and I'll show you what that's for. When you've got both the side rails on, just take it to the top box, put it in and make sure you've got a good sliding fit. Joggle it around a little bit, but that actually works very well. So now we can fit the front and the back. Quick check for the fit, and yeah, that's fine. It's not binding, not catching anywhere, and not too loose. Now don't worry about the fact that this is loose. By the time we put the front plate on, this is actually going to stay in position quite neatly. So that's the drawers all dried out now, and all four of them are ready to go. So now what we have to do is to fit the front plates, which are the sort of the decorative part of the drawers. Now obviously I've got to put these inside here, but remember when we were talking about this, the drawers don't come quite flush with this forward face here. They sit slightly back. So what I've got to do, if I can find it, there we go. I've just created this piece of wood and I'm going to put it in the back, right down at the back there. And then when I put the drawers in, they're now sitting just slightly forward of this face here. Now of course these fascia plates or fascias aren't fixed in yet, and what I've done is I've given myself a couple of millimeters on this side and a couple of millimeters clearance in between there. Obviously I can't be absolutely sure of where I'm going to be putting these yet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of double-sided tape onto the backs of each of them and position them that way. And then once I've done that, I can put a couple of screws through them and that will fix them in position, and we're going to have a nice even gap all the way around. So I've put the plates in the back and I've put the drawers in. I've put some bits of sticky, double-sided sticky tape on the fronts of the drawers, and also you may be able to see I've just folded up some A4 paper, just cut some bits off, folded it over, the idea being to push the drawers right the way down onto their runners. You don't want any slight warpage to affect you putting your plates on, so I'll just get on with that now. And there we are, that's everything stuck down. Looks pretty neat so far. Now obviously just holding that in place with tape's not going to be any good, so what I'm going to do, as you can probably see, I've marked spaces for where I'm going to put screws. Shouldn't take long to do this. So that's all the drawer fronts screwed on, and the next thing we have to do is to fit the blocks to the back. Now you may remember earlier in the series I mentioned we're going to have a pin that goes down through here, through each of the backs of the trays, and then out through the bottom, just a fraction out the bottom. And in order to do that, what we've got to do, if I just offer this up to here, I'm going to fit these 18mm by 18mm blocks that I've cut and glued, and I'm going to put them on the back corner here like that. Then they'll be drilled so that the pin can go all the way down through. So it's the next morning now. To give you an idea of where I've got to, I've given everything a bit of a sanding. I've got the blocks on the back, haven't yet put the holes through them. I'll do that shortly. Fascia plates are on, I screwed through the front and also glued, and I did actually at one point consider coming in through the back, but that just turned out to be just too much of a problem. So what I've done is, once the glue is dried, I've taken the screws back out again, and you can probably see here I've just filled in the holes and sanded down. I'll do a little bit more fine sanding before I go to paint, but really these things are on and they're going to be there forever now. So that's the dividers in, the glue's all dry, and I've taken the opportunity to just do a bit of final sanding. What I also did, I just actually rounded over the edges of the front plate here. What you will find is that with plywood, bits tend to splinter, so just run the sander along there, just make sure it's nice and smooth. So before we go into the lid, I'll put this in. As you can see, all the drawers are in now, and I'm going to drill the holes in the back. What I've done is I've just put this plate down just to give me some distance off the table, and the reason for that is I'm going to be using this quite long drill to drill straight down through the hole that we'd already got in the top here. Remember this one? We drilled those before on the drill press, so we know they're nice and straight. So as long as I'm holding these drawers in, when I drill down, this should now drill pretty easily. Now I haven't made the actual pin for this one yet. This is the one of my old box. But basically, if I hold that up, just goes in, and that's what locks all the drawers in so they don't fall out. Haven't done the other side yet, obviously, but as you can see, that's not going to fall out. So that's pretty much got the top box sorted out now. The next thing we're going to do is the lid. So while I was waiting for the glue to dry, I took the opportunity to cut the lid to size, and I used 6mm marine plywood. Now 6mm doesn't sound all that thick, and if you're a bit concerned about it, feel free to use 9mm. Because I've got all those supports in the top box, I'm perfectly happy that this will hold my weight. The whole idea of that is to make the lid as light as possible. What I've also done though, because I've got to attach hinges and catches on the front and rear, I've had to increase the size at the back and the front. And so what I've done is I've put a 9mm piece of plywood all the way around, as you can see, and that's just designed to allow me to get screws in there without just basically creating a weak point. Next thing I've got to do is to fit the foam. This is 50mm foam, just the sort that you get for cushions and so on. It's open cell, and obviously we've got this recess now, so I've actually cut a recess all the way around my piece of foam, and that will now, with a little bit of pushing in, like that, that'll now fit and everything sits nice and neatly. I've cut the vinyl oversized. I've allowed enough overlap either side to allow me to pin it down, same at the front and rear, and now it's just a question of using these upholstery tacks, which look like that, and I'm going to use those and just hammer them in along the edges. Just make sure you cut a nice straight edge along the vinyl and then lay it along the edge of the lid. I'm just going to start from the middle. Okay, now we just flip it over, and again we need to give this a little bit of pressure. You'll see that there's little dents and things in there. If I pull that, just pull down on the back, those dents will start to disappear. So I'm going to do exactly the same on this side, and I'm just going to keep the pressure on and start from the middle again. And now we need to do the edges. I've just tucked this one in and put one tack in just to show you. Same on the other side. And then we fold inwards and pull down to form a nice neat edge. Doesn't look too bad at all. I'll just fill in the holes in between the other ones. And that's one side done. So I'll just finish off this other side, and then we'll talk about the fitting of the hinges, catches and the decorative strip. So That's all the tacks in. I'll just run the knife along and we can trim off any excess. Okay, so that's the lid upholstered. I bought this decorative strip from an online upholstery supplier, and I'm going to go around the edges of the lid with it, so it's going to look something like that. Looks pretty neat actually. And what you do is you hold them in every sort of 50 millimeters or so. There's a hole, and you just hold them in with those dome head tacks. Now I can't fit this just yet because I need to work out where I'm going to put the hinges and also the catches. So I'm going to work out where I'm going to put that now, and once I've done it I can fit the upholstery strip so it actually fits perfectly. I've fitted the top half of the hinges, and I've done the same with the catches on the other side. Now, as you can see, I've just loose fitted this piece of that decorative strip, and it should now just be a question of just literally nailing into place. And that's it. That's the lid pretty much complete. Well, it's a day or two later, and I've spent the time just finishing off the top box, as I said. Let me show you where we've got to. Here it is. I've got the lid on. Hinges are completely fixed down now. The drawers are in, and they're sliding nicely. All four drawers working very well. I've also got these cleats on the side on all four corners. You may remember I cut these quite some time ago, and what I've done is I've taken this right angle aluminium, I've cut a notch out of here so that the drawers clear it, but these not only form decorative purposes, they also protect the corners of the plywood, but in addition to that they're also to some extent structural. The screws are actually going in to the sides of the aluminium and through this square aluminium here, this hollow tube aluminium, and that supports the existing screws which went through the wood, and so you've now got a good amount of strength on all the corners. And the last thing I had to do was to fit this chain on the side here, and all that does is just stop the lid from falling backwards and breaking the hinges. I've just spent a little bit of time fitting everything together, and I've also spent some time on just tidying things up, giving things a little bit of a polish and making them look nice. As you can see, the top box is fitted now to the main frame, and I just used this piece of aluminium here, which is 3 millimeters thick. I riveted where it's aluminium, and I screwed in where it goes into wood. In the lid, I've taken the time to make the little brass pins which stop the drawers coming out. I put all these black end caps on, as I said, just to make it look nice. I've also fitted this bar on the back. That's kind of a spreader bar, because it occurred to me when these legs are fully extended, there could be quite a lot of outward pressure or even inward pressure on this back area here. So that's just there to stop anything splaying. It shouldn't do, it's really just me being a bit cautious. On the front, of course, this footplate stops that from happening as well. So that's everything nice and stable. Down at the legs, I've taken the time to drill a hole through the outer legs now, so the inner legs are all lockable, like that. I've also taken the time to put these rubber gaiters on. They're purely cosmetic. The other thing I've done is to create a mechanism to keep the footplate upright when it's not in use. Obviously I'll do these up, but if this is on my back, it could just well wobble around a little bit. So I was going to make something really technical, but in the end this piece of bungee cord seems to do the job very well. Just loop it over a leg, take it around, loop it over a leg, and that's not going anywhere. Now I may decide to change that, but for the moment that seems to me to be a perfectly reasonable way of doing things. So that's us almost finished now. The final thing I've got to do for the box itself is to fit the carry strap. Now previously I used to just bolt a strap onto this area here in the centre of the box, but of course by having this front plate on, the centre of gravity is now changed from being in the centre here to further over this way. So to accommodate that, and also for security, I'm going to fit the strap at 2 points here and here on the metal frame. To fit the strap to here, I've had to create something like a yoke mechanism. And if I just turn this around, I've already fitted one on this side. And as you can see, it's like that. So fitted on here, and there's an adjuster here, so that by lengthening or shortening it, I can alter the centre of gravity and therefore makes the box balance. And of course I just clip the strap onto the top of there. Strap itself started off life as literally a length of this webbing. I bought 1/2 metre of chain, again from the DIY store, chopped out a link, and then just used that to fit down here and here on both sides. There's a stainless steel ring which forms this pivot point at the top here. And the brackets, all I did there was to take a piece of this flat bar aluminium. This is 1.6 millimeters thick. I haven't got a link out separately at the moment, but you'll get the idea. I put this in the vise at the point in the centre there, and then just bent it over. And the final result is what you see here. To fit it, again, all I did was to drill through the framework, and I've bolted it in this case. I've still got to do a little bit of alteration with this strap adjuster here, but frankly that's only going to take me a couple of minutes to do, and really once I've done that, the box is now done. So, proof's in the pudding then. Here's the final box, all set up ready to go. As you can see, I've extended the legs for you. Obviously we've got 6 legs on this one, so it's a little bit more than my existing box, which has only 4 legs, but it's something I'm going to have to get used to because I've never had a footplate before. In order to get it level, I was going to fit spirit levels to the whole thing, but in fact my local DIY store has one of these things, which is a multi-level, I suppose. Cost a couple of quid, and all I did was just put it on like that, and that's it centralised. And then when I've finished, all I have to do is to lift up the top, and that's me done. Saves me having to fit anything special. Now, as I've said, the legs are extended, so the proof is in the pudding. And is this where it all collapses? Let's find out, shall we? Here we go. There we go. And yes, I have tried this before, and yes, it does work. Don't think you have to really screw the knobs up. You don't have to do that. Literally nip them up and that'll be it. So with that said, I suppose the only thing left is to take the thing out and try it. So I think I'm probably going to have to take a few weeks before I can report back. Will I need to modify it? Probably. The problem is that you don't know if there's any little tweaks that I need to do until you've taken it out and tried it. Will I definitely need to do some modifications? Oh, I'm pretty sure I will. Will there be major modifications? I would assume not. I've been doing this for quite a while now, and really for me there's only a few new bits and bobs on here that I have to test out. So I'm pretty happy with it, but as I say, I won't know until a few weeks from now. So what I'll do is I'll do an update video for you, probably in about 2 months' time, just to show you any modifications that I found I had to make. Anyway guys, that's it. We're all done with the building of my new match fishing seat box. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, click the like button. If you want to subscribe, you can. And until the next time, bye for now.